Some stories don't just scare us, they defy our understanding of reality. They present a puzzle with no solution, a set of facts that simply cannot coexist. This is one of those stories. It's about a locked house, a sleeping child, and a terrifying scene of struggle with no apparent way in and no logical way out. It is the story of a crime that should have been impossible. On a cold autumn night, a teenage girl sat watching over a baby. Hours later, her father would find the house secured from the inside, the baby safe in her crib, and every door still locked. But the babysitter was gone. And the only clues left behind would point to a violent, terrifying, and inexplicable abduction. The scene he found was one of quiet, ordered chaos. Textbooks from her school bag were strewn about. The most terrifying evidence was a series of deep, frantic scuff marks on the walls and pry marks on a window screen. Signs of a desperate fight. In one room, the baby was still sound asleep in her crib, completely unharmed. The only way the abductor could have taken Evelyn out of the house was through the small basement window her father had used to get in. Investigators believed it was a scenario of terrifying logistics. But Evelyn was nowhere to be found. The house was empty. But she hadn't just left. There had been a struggle. They investigated a strange man who had been seen in the neighborhood earlier that day. They even considered the wild theory that Evelyn had staged her own disappearance. But the signs of a violent struggle made that seem impossible. This is the story of Evelyn Hartley and the impossible mystery of the babysitter who vanished from a locked room. A man named Ed Gein. The infamous Wisconsin murderer and grave robber who inspired the character of Norman Bates in Psycho was arrested. Who was the man who crept through that basement window? How did he manage to subdue a teenager and carry her out of a locked house without waking a baby or being seen? And what was the ultimate fate of Evelyn Hartley? His crimes were so horrific that he was briefly considered a suspect in Evelyn's disappearance, but no evidence ever linked him to the case. They speak of a desperate struggle against an unknown intruder. In a locked room, on a quiet night that was supposed to be just like any other. It's a story with no final chapter, a puzzle with a missing piece that was taken from the world forever. October 24, 1953, in La Crosse, Wisconsin. It became a local legend, a ghost story told to frighten children. The story endures because it violates our fundamental sense of logic and security. A home is supposed to be a fortress. A locked door is supposed to mean safety. The Hartley case demonstrated that sometimes it doesn't. The locked doors, the sleeping baby, the glasses on the floor, it was a perfect, unsolvable crime. It left a permanent scar on the community's sense of safety. 2 days after the abduction, a pair of blood-stained men's pants and a jacket were found miles away. The blood type matched Evelyn's. The clothes, however, could not be traced to any known suspect. He checked all the ground floor windows. They were closed and secured. Then, he would have had to drag an unwilling, fighting teenage girl back down into the basement, lift her out through the small window, and then climb out himself. Thousands of volunteers, police officers, and National Guardsmen scoured the countryside. They searched forests, dragged rivers, and checked abandoned buildings, but they found nothing. It was as if she had been erased from existence, all without waking the sleeping baby in the next room. It seemed almost impossible. Panic began to set in. He circled the house, peering into the windows. In the basement, he found a small window that was unlocked and slightly ajar. It was the only possible point of entry. The world felt safe, especially in a quiet, middle-class neighborhood like this one. More blood was found nearby. The trail seemed to be moving, but it led nowhere. The police were inundated with tips and confessions. Dozens of people confessed to the crime, a common and morbid phenomenon in high-profile cases. All of them were proven to be false. Around 6:30 p.m., she called her mother to confirm she had arrived safely. He decided to drive over to the house to check on her. When he arrived, he found a scene that was both ordinary and deeply unsettling. The lights were on. The radio was playing softly, but no one answered the door. A little later, she spoke to a friend on the phone, confirming plans for the next day. Everything was fine. But just after 8:30 p.m., Evelyn's father, Richard, tried to call the Rasmussen house. No one answered. Evelyn Hartley, a bright and popular 15-year-old high school student, was babysitting for a university professor named Vigio Rasmussen and his wife. Their daughter, a 20-month-old baby, was asleep in her crib. Evelyn was responsible and well-liked. This was a normal night in a normal town. He tried again and again. A knot of dread began to form in his stomach. It was completely out of character for Evelyn not to answer. He tried the front door. It was locked from the inside. He moved to the back door. It too was locked. He squeezed through the small opening and made his way up into the darkened house. In the living room, furniture was disturbed. A pair of eyeglasses, later identified as Evelyn's, lay on the floor with the lenses popped out. But the mystery only deepened. All the doors were still locked from the inside. The theory was that an intruder had entered through the basement window, crept upstairs, and subdued Evelyn. The search for Evelyn Hartley became one of the largest in the history of Wisconsin. Then the clues started to appear. But they weren't clues that led to answers. They were bizarre fragments that only deepened the mystery. A few days after that, a single tennis shoe belonging to Evelyn was found on the side of a highway. The investigation explored every possibility. They looked into local youths. One of the most promising and ultimately heartbreaking leads came years later. Years turned into decades. The case of Evelyn Hartley grew cold, but it never faded away. To this day, the case remains officially unsolved. No one was ever charged. Evelyn's body was never found. It leaves us with a set of chilling, unanswerable questions. The scuff marks on the wall are the final silent testimony to her terror. They are the only voice she has left.